It was the spring of 359 BC, and Macedonian king Perdikas III lies dead alongside his 4,000 warriors. The victorious Illyrians prepare to delve deeper into Macedonian territory, while the Paeonians, led by King Argaeus, descended from the upper Axius Valley, poised to invade from the north. Amid the ensuing chaos and terror, preempting the small kingdom of Macedon, there stood a young, 24-year-old prince, ready to rescue his kingdom. Phillip undoubtedly inherited one of the worst situations that any new monarch could encounter, and lesser men would have failed miserably in their efforts to save Macedonia. However, having spent his formative years as a hostage in Thebes, the dominant power in Greece at that time, Philip was far from an ordinary king. During his time in Thebes, he was mentored by some of the finest military minds of the era, most notably the brilliant generals Epaminondas and Pelopidas. From them, he gained invaluable knowledge of military strategy, particularly the use of shock tactics and the coordinated maneuvering of infantry and cavalry in battle. As a young observer, he likely witnessed firsthand the rigorous training and discipline of the renowned Sacred Band, the elite unit of 300 Theban warriors, whose effectiveness left a lasting impression on him. Beyond military education, Philip also acquired deep insights into the inner workings of a Greek polis, observing its governance, social structures, and internal conflicts. He keenly noted the frequent hostilities between the city-states, often driven by xenophobia and political rivalries. This understanding would serve him well in his later years, allowing him to skillfully manipulate one city-state against another, gradually asserting his own dominance with calculated diplomacy and strategic warfare. After his return to Macedonia in 365, Philip did not remain idle. First, he married his first wife, Phila, the daughter of a Macedonian noble, likely as a part of a strategic alliance. Second, Perdikas entrusted his brother with a portion of the kingdom to govern on the king's behalf. The exact location of this territory is uncertain, but it may have been the strategically important Amphixitis. Regardless of its precise location, Philip managed his domain during a period of an intense turmoil. Macedonia faced numerous adversaries, and much of his efforts were dedicated to preventing incursions by the Thracians and Paeonians. Additionally, he commanded a contingent of infantry and cavalry, and it is possible that during this time he began experimenting with some of the military strategies and techniques that he had acquired during his stay in Thebes. In early 359, Perdikas was slain in battle against the invading Illyrians, and his death triggered multiple threats to the kingdom's stability. Additionally, two rivals for the throne emerged as significant challenges. The Athenians, eager to reclaim their former colony of Amphipolis, decided to support one of them, a certain Argaeus. Upon learning of Perdikas' demise, the Athenians dispatched Argaeus northward, accompanied by 3,000 of their own troops, along with a contingent of mercenary forces commanded by Mavias. They landed at Methone, a coastal settlement on the Thermaic Gulf, situated less than 35 kilometers from Pella and Aegae. The second challenge to the throne came from an individual named Pausanias, who was likely backed by Berycides, a ruler of Thrace. Whether the Chalkidian League played any role in aiding this claimant remains uncertain, though it cannot be ruled out. Regardless, Pausanias advanced towards the capital, Pella, from the northeast. According to Justin, Perdikas' son and rightful heir, Amyntas, was merely an infant at the time. As a result, his uncle Philip, who was by then 24 years old, likely anticipated being appointed regent until his nephew reached maturity. However, events took an unexpected turn. Faced with severe threats to Macedonia's stability, the assembly chose to bypass Amyntas entirely, and, rather than naming Philip as a regent, proclaimed him king. The people then swore their oath of loyalty to him. This decision to overlook the legitimate successor shows the gravity of the crisis Macedonia was experiencing, as the Argaeid dynasty traditionally upheld the principle that the throne should pass directly from father to eldest son. If the rightful heir was underage, a regent would typically govern until he came of age. Nevertheless, Amyntas appears to have led a privileged life throughout Philip's reign, and did not seem to resent his uncle wielding all the power. Man, money and time were at the forefront of Philip's strategy during this critical juncture, and he knew that he had to act swiftly. He gathered the remnants of the Macedonian army and likely enlisted mercenaries. Yet the army's weakened condition left it vulnerable to any potential aggressor. Realizing he cannot confront all his enemies simultaneously, he opted to deal with them separately. Adapting to the situation, Philip abandoned any immediate plans for direct military resistance, and instead turned to diplomacy, an approach rooted in the cunning and strategic deception that would later define his rule. The most immediate danger stemmed from the Illyrians, though fortunately for the Macedonians, Bardalis did not capitalize on his victory over Perdikas. Instead, he withdrew to his own territory, effectively putting an end to the Illyrian threat for the time being. The most plausible explanation for this unexpected retreat is that the two rulers reached some form of an agreement, or at the very least, a temporary truce. As part of this agreement, Philip may have secured peace through his marriage to an Illyrian princess, Audata. Additionally, the Illyrians likely retained control over Upper Macedonia, and Philip may have been compelled to continue paying them tribute as part of the settlement. Philip then turned his attention to the issue of the Paeonians. Rather than engaging them in battle, he employed a more pragmatic approach, offering gifts to some and enticing others with generous promises. Through this strategy, he successfully negotiated a temporary peace agreement. In essence, he simply bribed them to refrain from launching an invasion. Philip was also fortunate when it came to dealing with the pretender Pausanias. He managed to bribe Berisades into eliminating him, temporarily removing the threat from Thrace. Exactly how or where Philip was able to secure such funds so quickly remains unclear. It seems likely that these dealings were as much about diplomacy as they were about money. His envoys to Paeonia and Thrace probably carried a modest sum, alongside a great deal of persuasive rhetoric, filled with grand promises that Philip had no real intention of fulfilling. During this critical period, Philip also focused on strengthening his most valuable supporters, the army, the very men who had proclaimed him king. This marked the beginning of an extended period of military training and innovation, with early results becoming apparent almost immediately. The new regime's first campaign was perfectly suited for testing these initial reforms. Argaeus and the Athenians still posed a significant threat, and it was in this situation that Philip's characteristic cunning in dealing with Athens first became evident. He skillfully misled them into believing that by previously withdrawing Macedonian troops from Amphipolis, that he was relinquishing any claim to the city. The Athenians, eager to reclaim their former colony, readily accepted this interpretation and, as a result, withdrew their backing for Argaeus. Consequently, Matthias, the Athenian commander, remained in Methone with his troops, leaving Argaeus in a precarious position. Now abandoned by Athens, Argaeus had only his mercenaries and a group of Macedonian exiles who were determined to return home. In a last-ditch effort, they marched towards Aegae, hoping to incite a rebellion in their favor. However, when they arrived and appealed to the people to recognize Argaeus as their rightful king, the people refused. The loss of Athenian support likely played a role in their decision, but Philip's presence nearby in Pella was undoubtedly another key factor. Realizing his plan had failed, Argaeus turned back towards Methone. However, just as he was halfway, he was intercepted by Philip, who, hearing of Argaeus' plan, mustered whatever army he could and hurried to engage him. The king and pretender met near Aegae, and the battle for Macedonia's kingship was about to begin. Although the armies were similar in numbers, roughly 3,000 on each side, Philip had a smaller number of infantry, but he had one strategic advantage over his opponent, the cavalry. Argaeus' army consisted mostly of mercenary hoplites. The battle started with Philip personally leading his men to engage the enemy, and a fierce fighting took place between the Macedonians and Argaeus' mercenaries. After a short while, both infantries were now fully engaged, and Philip decided to use this crucial moment to signal to his cavalry to flank the mercenaries, effectively attacking them on all sides. This attack was so deadly for the unsupported hoplites that they broke almost immediately. This forced Argaeus and his staff to flee on a nearby hill, but to no avail. Instead of chasing the routed mercenaries, Philip maintained his focus on his real threat and decided to surround the hill from all sides. Realizing the battle was now lost, Argaeus surrendered, and what became of him next is unknown, but we could probably guess. With this threat now neutralized, Philip turned to diplomacy, sending a letter to Athens proposing an alliance. The Athenians, persuaded by his overtures, eventually agreed to a peace treaty. The most notable clause in the agreement was Philip's formal renunciation of any claim to Amphipolis. In what seemed miraculous, Macedonia had been saved. Within just a year of assuming power, Philip had neutralized the 4 major external threats that had shaped his dramatic rise to the throne. He accomplished this through his masterful combination of deception, bribery, strategic marriage, and rapid decision-making. There was still potential danger from the Chalcidians, who had a long history of interfering in Macedonian affairs. Perhaps realizing that they might be next on Philip's list, tried to ally themselves with Athens, but the Athenians rejected them. Philip must have realized that the deals he struck with his various enemies in 359 had bought him little except time. Bribes would only work in the short term, and besides, he did not have the financial resources to keep buying people off or to maintain mercenaries. If the kingdom were to prosper, it was essential for him to secure its borders against future invaders, to unite Macedonia, and to stimulate the economy. For that, he needed an army. Our story on the rise of Macedonia and Philip will continue soon. Join our channel and hit the bell button so you don't miss out on the next video. Please comment down below whether you like the video, and also which parts of the Hellenistic age would you like to see us cover next. This was Phalangite, and we'll see you with your sarissas in hand on the battlefield in the next one.